Enthusiasm, from the Greek, filled with God, is an ongoing energy supply tapped into the flow of life itself. Enthusiasm is grounded in play, not work. Far from being a brain-numb soldier, our artist is actually our child within, our inner playmate. As with all playmates, it is joy, not duty, that makes for a lasting bond. I am doing well. This has been a very interesting, fascinating week, and I was going through your little briefing, and I'm very excited because I feel like we're definitely on similar wavelengths this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think this week is very clear to me. There are two things that I really wanted to talk about. And the
Mhm.
first is what Ms. Julia Cameron said about discipline versus enthusiasm, because it was controversial. And then also, I would love to talk about this idea of creative U-turns, because that has also been a huge eureka moment for me this week. So I
Yeah.
actually just wanted to start by reading out for the kids at home two things. Blocked artists are not lazy, they are blocked. And do not call procrastination laziness, call it fear, because the term lazy has been something that you have said a lot in the past few weeks, like recurrently, and I found it so interesting even then. And then kind of the way this is addressing laziness as a concept was just like, I was like, oh, Veronica. Yeah, but also, where is the quote about enthusiasm that absolutely blew my mind?
Enthusiasm, from the Greek, filled with God, is an ongoing energy supply tapped into the flow of life itself. Enthusiasm is grounded in play, not work. Far from being a brain-numb soldier, our artist is actually our child within, our inner playmate. As with all playmates, it is joy, not duty, that makes for a lasting bond.
That was so beautiful. And also, this line, as artists, grounding our self image in military discipline is dangerous. In the short run, discipline may work, but it'll work only for a little while. By its very nature, discipline is rooted in self admiration. That is just so wild. The discipline itself, not the creative outflow, will become the point. All of these quotes that we just read blew my mind because I've never heard anyone say that discipline isn't important for an artist.
Yeah.
I think that's outrageous. What a thing to claim.
Yeah, that was really a sucker punch because like we're always talking about what is the benefit that you get from A, B, C, or D habit that's not really productive. And it's just so interesting to think about because discipline has really served me. At least, I've thought that it really served me. But then when framed in this brand new way, it's like, wow. Yeah, maybe I was just thinking of it in the wrong kind of way, or like there's a healthier way to think about it. But I would love to hear your thoughts on it because I know that that really stuck out to you.
Yeah, so when I read that, I was, first of all, my first thought was so funny because normally I'm a big rest advocate. I love that kind of stuff. But my first thought was like, no, no, you do need discipline actually. Because that's the one thing like that I really love. Like I love quotes or advice that talks about how, you don't have to be like the most talented person in the world to make art. You just need discipline. It makes me feel very um it feels equalizing to me on some level. But
Yeah.
when I started to think about it more, I started to think about the idea of like obedience and like how when we're growing up, like being disciplined, like doing your work when you're supposed to do and doing all the things you're supposed to do, is really exemplified. And we, obedient people, disciplined people in that sense are rewarded. Um, and what I started thinking was like about how like a lot of the ways that I have abused my body and mind in the past, and then sort of thus my creativity also suffered there, was kind of like under the guise of obedience and discipline, right? Like that was like what I was pretending I was doing. And so when I go to correct that damage that I've done to like my mental health or my physical health by being obedient, by saying yes to everything, by working on all these other things, or by, being obedient, because the world's telling us not to be creative. They're telling us to, like, do something else because no one
Yeah.
likes artists. So,
Yeah.
like, so in that same sense, like, it was my obedience, it was my discipline that was like, maybe I'll do something better or more conventional or whatever. And then when I go to correct that through obedience, a different kind of obedience, like, I approach the the cure with the same energy that, like, did the damage in the first place, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
if creativity is meant to be this liberating thing, this kind of expression of, like, our souls, as opposed to just like the kind of like perfect little soldier we are in the world, then
Mhm.
approaching that with the very tool we've used to, like, try to be obedient, we try to be like good little people, good little girls, is never going to work. And it also has been something been thinking about a lot lately, in terms of health, because I feel like wellness as a concept in the wellness movement and all those things is very much like within the context of obedience. There's something kind of girl bossy about it. It's something like you're
Mhm.
getting that in the way that in the text she talks about, like, the discipline becomes the joy in and of itself. And that's so true. Like, I think I'm pursuing taking care of my body, or I think I'm pursuing, taking care of my creativity, but actually what I'm doing is giving myself those endorphins.
Mhm.
Once again, relying on those same endorphins I've always, relied on, which is, look, I've done this and this and this today, and that means I'm a good little girl, and that means, like, I have permission to exist, basically. And so,
Mhm.
like, it's so radical to me to think that creativity could be beyond that idea of, like, obedience to your own goals or whatever. And in my sort of health sphere, what that has meant is, like, being really compassionate and very slow and very intuitive. And instead
Mhm.
of ticking all of my, like, neurotic little regimes off and saying I did my yoga today and I drank my things today and I ate this today and I'm like clever, actually being present with my body, which is much harder work. Reading this and realizing that, like, that same logic needs to be brought into the creative life was so fascinating to me.
So now, when do you think that all of this started for you? This idea of wanting to tick off all the boxes and falling in love with this idea of discipline? Because when I was going through this, I was having this curious thought that when I was younger, I really used to rail against the idea of discipline, and it kind of took me educating myself on the value of discipline to say, okay, now, okay, I can see why this would be helpful, and then actually falling in love with that. And now it's like, I feel like I need to reverse yet again and be like, well, maybe there is a value to discipline, and maybe there's a value to being undisciplined, and finding the median point in that. But when did that start for you? Like, were you always interested in it, or did you learn that along the way?
I feel like it's a bit of both. I mean, I feel like our society, our culture does encourage us all to be disciplined. I'm preferring the word obedient in this context just because I
Mhm.
feel like that is so much more of what it's about for me, and, like, that's so much of where the toxicity is. So many spiritual traditions rely on discipline, and
Mhm.
there's a way to do it that, as I said in a previous episode, like, it comes from the word disciple. You are making yourself a disciple of something, and that can be love, or it can be like this capitalist work culture, or it can be a sense of your own, unworthiness unless you achieve blah blah blah. So I think there's
Mhm.
a way that discipline can be bad, but the negative element for me in my head at the moment is it's more clarifying if I'm like obedience. That's what I'm calling what I think the kind of negative half of it is. But I think we're
Mhm.
all, I mean, we live in a culture that wants us on a certain level to be obedient. That's a very natural thing, and I think it's this idea that it'll bring you safety.
Mhm.
It's you'll be safe if you follow the rules, and I don't know what at what point in our lives we internalize that. I think it's such a radical thing to point out that we live in a culture where a lot of our kind of surface level self-esteem without having gone deeper, without having done the personal work. Just maintaining that surface level self-esteem is maintained by, achieving these things, and how discipline is this way of buoying yourself up in your own private world by saying, like, I've done the micro, which is achieving all of my personal things during the day, and that makes me believe that in the macro, in the years, I'll be achieving all of the things in society so that everyone will see I'm achieving and think that I'm really successful. And to remove, just to take away even that level of self-aggrandizement, that level of self-esteem, like kind of white sugar self-esteem, even from the things you love, even being like, no, you're not even allowed to be obedient to your art practice. You have to be just in it, is like
Yeah.
baffling for me. And I have so many follow-up questions. But I'd love to hear about how you were with this, and particularly the laziness quote.
Oh gosh, yeah, that one stuck right out to me. I was like taking screenshots of it and everything, just
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I really need to solidify that to memory because this is a challenging concept for me to wrap my brain around because like I said, you know, this idea of laziness and time scarcity and all of these things, I have witnessed people in my life who have very much let their lives slip away. And I don't necessarily know that they would think of it like that, but it is something where, like, they have complained for as long as I've known them that they wanted to do A, B, C, or D, and time just got away from them. Life happened. They couldn't do it, this, that, and the other thing. And looking from the outside in, I see a lack of discipline as to why many of those things haven't happened.
Mhm.
That's everybody's individual choice, but I think if something is frustrating you for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, and you're frustrated by the fact that it's not getting done, it's an all-consuming idea for you, and we're always blaming the external world, like, see, I couldn't do it because this happened, I couldn't do it because that happened, when really, like, I think that there is this duality of we have responsibility, and then yes, the outside world does have a huge impact on us. So it's just really challenging for me to say, I don't know, just like I have such an allergy to the idea of laziness because it's not served me well. I don't feel like it's served other people well. However, that understanding that it's not laziness, it's fear, that is something that I need to commit to memory and understand that it's like I can be more compassionate towards myself and towards others because that's really all it is. That made so much sense to me. It's
Yeah.
fear. This is why we avoid some of the things that we say we most want. I guess just what's frustrating is when you're personally not aware that it's your fear and you're blaming it on all these other things, or you witness other people blaming it on all these other things, and it's like I wish that everyone could just know, no, 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 like, again, like Julia Cameron says, let's call it what it is. It's not these things that you're thinking, it's not these excuses that you're making up for yourself and that you're really leeching onto. It's like, it's fear, it's scary, and that's okay, but that's what it is.
Okay, so my controversial take is that I don't actually think laziness exists.
Yeah, I know you've said this.
And I think it's like, it's a way that we cut down people whose vulnerability we don't want to deal with. So whether it's
Mhm,
vulnerability because of trauma and mental illness that's preventing people from doing what
mhm.
they want, whether it's there's hidden socioeconomic or like generational stuff that we can't immediately see when we look at them, so we're like, oh, they're lazy. Whether it's like, the fear thing, but that also in
Yeah.
itself is like so complicated because I really feel like there are a lot of people, like I know what you mean, but I feel like there's a lot of people who actually are disciplined in a lot of elements of their life and yet will not put their discipline towards something they love for the fear reason. So it's not
Mm.
that they are lazy entirely, it's just that we learn from, and the other thing is like we learn from our culture and from our upbringing what we are allowed to put energy to. And so a lot of these people may have been deeply, deeply shamed and told that like you may have a lot of energy, you may have a lot of discipline, but you're not allowed to put it towards yourself. And like we don't know how strongly those messages went to these people. And then there's obviously just the ableist element. Some people are just sick and they're called lazy and they literally can't move. I feel like laziness is one of those words that sounds like a dog whistle to me. Like I'm not sure that it's real. Like I feel like this is like the concept of laziness is something that I think really freaks you out in yourself. And also it
Oh yeah,
seems that you are constantly kind of judging the people around you a little bit.
a
Like
lot.
so I'm like, if laziness it kind of doesn't exist, is it that you are not extending that compassion to yourself? Because technically the theme of this week is compassion, and I wonder if
Yeah.
you are withholding the compassion from yourself that you deserve to be like, you're actually not lazy. Like you've gotten ideas from real places, you're doing your best. There are things, you know what I mean? And then also if you're kind of like worry about other people's laziness is maybe a projection of that. And then like third question, is it a lack of compassion or is it a fear in itself? Like are you afraid of what you might find if you looked behind your like accusation of laziness like to yourself?
I mean, I think you're 100% right. Like I actually agree with you that there probably really isn't laziness, and there is it is just fear, and it's procrastination, and it's overwhelm, it's depression, it's not being able to do the things that we want to do physically, mentally, spiritually. Like I totally agree with you, and I think that like
Mhm.
the root, like if what we refer to as laziness is like this surface level thing that we're looking at, the root always goes so much deeper than that.
Mhm.
I think anytime that we are frustrated in what other people are doing, it's totally
Mhm.
just like something, it's a symptom of what's going on inwardly. And I for sure still have those fears, and I know that I need to work through them. There and I am for sure being judgmental. Like I'm not gonna pretend like I'm not judgmental. I just it's like this thing that I have expressed before, trying to balance within myself, where
Mhm.
I have such a drive. It's like I can look at a situation and say, "Hey, you're feeling this pain from this lack of fulfillment in your life." And to me, it's quite clear the steps that we could start to take to feel that fulfillment, and releasing that need for, I need you to feel this fulfillment. Like if that person doesn't want to, I just think it's like this this own fear that I have of like this crazy existential thing of like, if you're not gonna make your life the best experience that you could possibly make it within your,
Mhm.
abilities and whatever, like, then what are we doing? Because I just don't think that people were put on this earth to like have a dopamine addiction and play video games like as many, like skirt their, when I think lazy, that's sort of like the image that I have in my mind. But again, like those are probably their own fears and their own existential issues and all of those stuff that's like
Mhm.
none of my business. But little Capricorn over here just can't help but be like, "Excuse me?"
I feel like, not to state the obvious, but I feel like what we're talking about here is control, like wanting to control, like a deep fear of like, can I control my own life? And then maybe
Yeah.
like being like, and my stress about that is like making me want to control other people's lives, maybe a little
Oh,
bit.
yeah.
And I think it's interesting because now, okay, we don't have to take everything here as gospel. Like, there's many parts of the artist's way that I'm like, I love the vibe of, like I'm a real improv theater rules kind of girl. Like when I'm reading, I'm a real yes and
Yeah.
rather than like this is bullshit. But There are parts of this book that I'm like, that one's not real. Like this for me personally, like there was parts of the money chapter where I was like, okay, you're out to lunch on this one, in my opinion, but I'm going to go with the
Yeah.
flow. But I do think it's so interesting to entertain what it would mean to approach it, you know, to try and cultivate enthusiasm. And you know, they're not saying not to show up for your work, but like what he said about the idea of like thinking of it as play and kind of telling yourself, oh, I'm meeting my like inner artist for a play date tomorrow at 6 a.m.
Hmm.
I think what's so terrifying about it is that we can't control it. Like that sounds so wild. And I think something that's like, I can't remember if I've already said this on this podcast, I may have, but something that I've been thinking about all the time in the last few weeks is this idea that we control things that we don't trust. And when it comes
Mm.
to like in a relationship, like the reason control like a controlling person in a relationship hurts the relationship so much is because the person who's being controlled learns from that interaction that they're not trusted, and that's how, and then the trust
Mm.
breaks down, and this whole idea of like, if you really loved me for who I am, you would trust me, you wouldn't control me. And so if discipline is, and these rules that I'm setting for myself, whether to do with like my healing or whether to do with creativity or whatever, is so deeply rooted in control, and when I start to look take a step back, I often see like, yeah, I've put these things in place and they're kind of about the goal itself, but they are also kind of about um, trying to put safety locks on my life. So, an example is that with my health problems, it's really hard for me sometimes not to go overboard, not to do too much. And when I do too much, my body gets very sick. And so I
Yeah.
have these rules to try and trick myself into not doing too much. And one of them is like, I don't drink coffee. And the reason I don't drink coffee is because I'm like, if I drink coffee, I'll want to do more and more. But what's interesting is when you start to interrogate that rule, you realize, okay, but that means I don't think I can trust myself in the moment to make the decision not to make myself sick. So I'm building all these rules based on the assumption that I can't make decisions for myself and that I have to
Yeah.
make them now and set out all these rules and control everything so that I don't mess up in the way that like we reaffirm our beliefs through thinking them, but we also reaffirm our beliefs through our action. Maybe these really strict rules and these really strict disciplines are a way of us of reaffirming our beliefs that we are lazy, or reaffirming our beliefs that we won't finish the thing, or that we can't achieve these things. And so we get like, it almost perpetuates the fear. Like if the fear of not of getting sick, or the fear of being lazy is propelling me and stifling me, and then I'm putting all these rules in place that are based on the assumption that I'm lazy, so I
Yeah.
have to make this rule about writing every day for 3 hours, or the assumption that I'll
Hmm.
make myself sick. Like maybe the discipline, which feels like the thing that's going to be saving us from disaster, is actually things like reaffirming our negative like beliefs about ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, because it's like having this shadow person over you constantly saying, you need this discipline because without it, you're going to be bad and you're not going to be good enough and
Yeah.
your work's not going to get done. I
Yeah.
think
So like what
it's,
would it mean to like trust ourselves?
do you feel like you can trust yourself? Like, what do you think would happen if you trusted yourself?
I don't know. I think the truth is I don't feel like I can trust myself, which is really
Yeah,
sad. But
same.
maybe that's good to know. Like maybe it's
Yeah.
good to start there, and instead of doing all this, putting all these rules in place so that I don't have to deal with that reality, maybe it's good to be like, okay, let's remove all these rules. That feels really scary. Why does
Hmm.
that feel really scary? Like maybe
Hmm.
that is the work we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it's very revolutionary and it is
Mhm.
indeed very controversial because I don't know, I guess to bring it back to the idea of like a controlling person in a relationship, right? You know, there is the relationship dynamic where the person is fine and has not done anything to set the other person off. Like the more controlling person is coming into the relationship
Mhm.
seeking something that they can control. But then there is also the relationship dynamic where person B over here has again and again and again misused person A and mistreated person A to the point where now person A doesn't trust them, and they are trying to use control to find a way of trusting them because they have made it clear that they're not going to be trustworthy. And not that that's a right way of handling that, but that's almost the relationship that I feel like I've had with myself, where I have misused and abused myself, my time, my creative practice, saying I'm going to do one thing and then doing another, consistently making the wrong decisions to the point where like there's a part of me that, yeah, I don't trust myself. And so I guess this idea of like discipline, and I guess it's like in my mind, I've gotten myself backed into this corner of it's either we have discipline or we have nothing because we're going to procrastinate and not do anything. And I am very open-minded and excited by the idea that like enthusiasm, joy, and play can have a part in this, because it's like maybe this is not just like what we either have this option or this option. Like there could be a multitude of options that we've not considered just because we've been living in this abusive, toxic relationship with ourselves.
First of all, it's a real head melt, like the bifurcation of self. Even the two relationship scenarios that you laid out were so fascinating. But when you were talking about the second one, I was like, but how, like, which part of me is betraying which part of me? And like, it's just so baffling. Yeah, I think it's also not just about replacing one thing with the other. So it's not just about saying, well, today I got up at 6 a.m. and wrote because of discipline, and tomorrow I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. and write because of enthusiasm instead. It
Yeah.
might be about really terrifying ourselves and being like, okay, if I take away the rules for myself and I don't sit down and constantly say like, here's my timetable, if like what happens if I just observe, and maybe the enthusiasm will take the place and maybe it'll run with it and maybe everything will be easier and better and more wonderful, maybe. But also maybe I will find myself in procrastination, in fear, in not showing up to the things I care about. And if that does happen, is it okay if that happens for a brief period, just so that I can ask myself why? Because
Mhm.
we can, I think it's fair to assume, or I like to assume, that this isn't how I am naturally. It's not like naturally I don't want to do any of the things that I love and I have to force myself to, and we'll talk about this in a second because I love the idea of coaxing and the images of coaxing yourself that came up
Mhm.
in this chapter. I'm not saying that we don't have to encourage ourselves at all. We definitely do. Being alive is hard and you have to like make space for what you love. But like I think sometimes you have to let the control go and then let things fall apart a little bit to see what, maybe to use a visual metaphor, to see what kind of broken things you've been holding together with
Mhm.
control. Like maybe if we're constantly controlling ourselves, we're trying to bypass the bit of the journey where we learn why we would be holding ourselves back in the first place.
What comes to mind is this idea of being younger and just kind of going with the flow and experiencing what happens to you, versus
Mm-hmm.
this idea of like trying to reverse engineer everything. Like, and I also find it really fascinating just in the context of the book, because I think Julia Cameron does herself play with that, where it's like we need to release control. We need to just allow ourselves. But then, even within the context of this one chapter, we also are asked to have a very clear goal in mind, that in a sense we are reverse engineering, because it's like, what is
Mm-hmm.
it that you want to accomplish, and now what do you need to do each year, each month, each week? What do you need to do right now in order to achieve that? So it's like, yeah, it definitely is a mind meld, as you said, because it's like I don't like Okay, so I have to control myself, but I can't control myself too much, and I have to coax myself like a baby horse or whatever, but like like
Mm.
I don't know. It's just, yeah, it's really, at least for me, it's very challenging to find that middle ground. I'm also quite an extreme person, so it's like whatever
Yeah.
we're doing all in, but like, yeah, it's it's just
Yeah.
challenging.
I think it comes down to that fine line where it's like, is the rush you're getting out of it actually just the rush of ticking things off your to-do list?
Yeah,
Like, has it
yeah,
become about that? And I think it's so easy for that to happen, for just in the
yeah,
thrust of life, just like getting into that space where you're just like, I just want to feel on top of things. And so you're just like, you're just doing it again for the thrill of discipline, because discipline has a weird high to it. But I
yeah.
think it is a somewhat superficial high. It has a benefit that's deep, in the sense of
I
like meditating for an hour every day is a discipline, but it's a very deep discipline that you grow, and that has, effects in your body. But then, like, if you're meditating every day so that you can just feel like you're the best person in the world and you're doing everything right and it's
yeah.
all really egoic, it's kind of ironic because it's like the opposite of what it's supposed to be. And maybe that's also true of creativity. Like, if creativity is about freedom, maybe making your entire creativity and only judging it on the basis of your own, like, obedience to your own rules is like making it almost nullified.
Yeah, and it is kind of it's almost like a Catholic
It
a
always is.
Catholic thing. It brings to mind the image of, like, I'm reading Anne of Green Gables right now, and there's this amazing part where she like goes to Sunday school for the first time, and Anne is just this like amazingly filled with life, filled with imagination character, and she goes to Sunday school, and then she's just like coming back, and she's just like, I really love God, but like this priest didn't really seem to care. Like he was just kind of saying this prayer, and I've never really prayed before, but if I were to pray, I feel like it wouldn't be like that. Like there's so much joy and excitement in the world, and he just seems very like he's just kind of going through the motions, and it's, it's like this controversial thing for her to say, but it reminds me of that, because it's like, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? Are we on paper doing everything right, but not feeling it and not getting the main benefit out of it that we're supposed to, because it's become this completely surface level experience that's just like, okay, we prayed, okay, we meditated, okay, we ate our green juice, okay, we, and it's just like there's no connection to it anymore.
The other thing I really wanted to discuss is the
Yeah.
idea of creative U-turns, because
Yes.
this section was so fascinating to me. So basically, do you want to explain what a creative U-turn is?
Yeah, I mean, with not going by the book's definition, what I've gleaned from it is basically when you're on a creative path, and then you're this close to it, you've done all the things right, you're right around the corner from somewhat success, and you stop dead in your tracks. I mean, is that how you would describe it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because she just kind of describes it and sets it forth as this completely normal phenomenon.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny because I think actually I find this true of a lot of things in the Artist's Way book, is that when you're reading them, they always sound so obvious and they always sound like things we'd never do. And then when she says, like, now name yours,
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, there's millions of them and I'm doing most of them right now. But I wanted to hear, you were talking about how you wanted to kind of like, this whole chapter made you want to sort of start to forgive yourself for the creative U-turns. And they really emphasize in this chapter the idea of compassion, this idea of like,
Mm.
all of this is so normal and everyone goes through it. So I wanted to hear about this kind of compassion you're thinking of extending to yourself.
Yeah, and I love that you said I'm thinking of extending it to myself, because not quite there yet, but we're working on it. We're trying. Me and me are going to couples therapy based on our conversation last week, where I uncovered like these major scarcity issues that I have with time. I realized like I've been thinking a lot about that this week, and I realized that I have so many of these creative U-turns that are essentially the catalyst for where a lot of this began. So for example, like I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but I had auditioned for The Voice at one point,
Wow.
and yeah, and so I like just the way that she describes what a creative U-turn is, I feel like this is just like the perfect embodiment of this, where I signed up, I got in line, I went all the way there. This is when I was still living on Long Island, and I went all the way into New York City at the Javits Center, and I waited for 5+ hours with no food, no water, and like I was there. I that should have been everything I needed to be like, "Hey, let me shoot my shot." But what did I
Mhm.
do? I self-sabotaged, and I had told myself like I never really was resolute on what audition song I was going to choose, and I was between two, one of which was like a more powerful song, I'm Going Down by Mary J. Blige, and I feel like
Mhm.
it expressed like
Amazing.
more, love that song, but I feel like it expressed more of my personality as a singer and like my voice and everything. And then the other one was the very wispy, airy Fiona Apple version of Across the Universe. That's a lovely song, but it's not a song that shows me as a
Mhm.
singer. And so I get into the room, I'm finally in the audition room, and the girl, like maybe 3 people before me, sings I'm Going Down by Mary J. Blige. So now I'm like, shit, I can't do that too. It's going to be like
Mhm.
way too much comparison. And instead, I chose to go with the Fiona Apple version, but I really wasn't, or Fiona Apple's Across the Universe, but I really wasn't connected to it. And it just like what's ironic is that the girl who sang I'm Going Down got
Mhm.
into the next round, and I was cut. And I might have been cut no matter what. Like, it's fine that my story is not, and then she got onto The Voice and she became this
Yeah.
famous person. That's totally fine. But it's more disappointing to me that I didn't give it my all. And that is a very common theme that has showed up again and again and again, specifically with my experience in the performing arts industry. Like, I can
Mhm.
now look back and be like, you sabotaged this, you sabotaged that. And I now understand that it was like me not having a great concept of my fear and not being comfortable with the idea of success in those arenas. And like, I understand why I was self-sabotaging, but yeah, I think I'm still moving through that compassion and finding that forgiveness for like, but she didn't know. She was doing the best she
Yeah.
can. And maybe we should even just celebrate the fact that she's like this young little 18-year-old, 19-year-old who's like, I'm gonna audition for The Voice. Like, that was
Yeah.
her, that was a
Yes.
huge thing for her. That was the best she did. Now it's your turn to like take up the torch and move through life the best way that you can.
First of all, incredible lead addition for the voice. That is such a good Veronica lore. I love that. Um,
Thank you.
what really stuck out to me about all of this was the kind of the visual image she wrote in this chapter, where she describes your creativity or your talent or whatever she used as like a young and skittish horse. I don't know why that really just like visually worked for me, because just this idea of like it's jumpy and it's going to be jumpy for a while and it's going
Yeah.
to take a long time before it stops being jumpy, considering we're just beginning all of this work and everything. What I'm visually imagining is just like you're just leading it on slowly. It's going to keep getting frights and wanting to jump back, and you're just going to have to keep gently coaxing it forward. The whole section made me, when I started to write them out, I realized that I'm actually It's not so, I mean, I'm sure there's so many from my past, but it was actually the ones that I'm doing now that really
Yeah.
shocked me. You know, I didn't think I was holding myself back in any way. But it's so, except for in all the ways I've discussed in the 8 episodes up till now, but not in the current version. There were just all these things, ways I'm holding myself back that I had no idea. And when I started
Yeah.
to read the examples and then write, I think there was a question about, you know, what are your current ones you're doing? It
Yeah.
was so fascinating because I realized that I'm actually really, for the first time in my life, I think I'm in the era when the most opportunities are coming towards me.
Yeah.
Um, and what realized is that I keep opportunities keep being extended to me, and I keep thinking that I'm not ready to take them. I feel like there was almost an example exactly like this in the book. I've had an opportunity multiple times recently where another woman, another writer who is older than me and has a career, etc., has like kind of just extended the offer to help me, like to talk to me about it and to help me, like talk to me about my work and to read my work. And every single time I've just been like, I just haven't, because I'm just like, I don't have the right things to say yet. And I don't have the stuff to email. And this isn't the moment for it. And I'm not like, and it's just so strange. And I'm working on this project at the moment that like I literally like have a mentor for, because it's as part of like a course. So like I have a teacher who's like there to help me with this project. And I'm just
Ah.
like not asking for help. Like I literally like was doing this exercise and then immediately was like, pause, put my artist away notebook to the side, goes on laptop, like arranges Zoom meeting like
Oh,
right
that's
away.
so good.
But what really kind of I realized was like sometimes things feel very scary and they feel very inappropriate, and we do kind of trust that voice. The way I've envisioned this journey so far, from kind of the artist you were to the artist you will be, you know, like the way I've envisioned this journey is in a kind of a way where you do this work and then you are more confident in general and you just have more of a going for it energy. And this kind of other way of doing it, where it's like you realize what you're doing, you gain some self-awareness, and then even if you don't feel strong in this moment, even if I don't feel like I've solved all my problems and I feel really confident about what I'm doing, there's another option, which is that I can just gently coax myself from task to task. So I
Yeah.
feel like the goal, or what we tend to envision when we're doing the Artist Way course and we're thinking about how confident and how unblocked we'd like to be, is imagining that you're there in the voice audition and you just like walk in and you're like completely, you feel all of your things and you're just like, I'm going to sing what I came to sing and I know all of my things and I've worked through everything. And like there's another version where you get there and exactly what happens and you're completely terrified and you're thinking you shouldn't say it, and all that's different is that you're just like, this is me being skittish and that is okay, and I'm just going to gently coax myself and be like, everything in me is wanting to sing this quieter number, and I'm just going to be that like almost parent to my creativity and be like, sweetie, you're doing Mary J. Blige. So today I was like, I don't feel any more confident about the work, I don't feel any more worthy of help, but I was just like, all I have to do today is realize what I'm doing and then make the appointment. And that was like
Yes.
my daily coaxing.
Yes. And I would be really curious if you're willing to share. What
Mhm.
do you think holds you back from that thing specifically? Like you've mentioned that this has happened to you multiple times. You've had this opportunity. And what is the fear, like the main fear that's keeping you from this opportunity?
It's probably just the unfamiliar, right? Like when we
Yeah.
are in a situation, thrown into a situation that, and in a kind of an odd way, it might be lack of control. Like it is the
Mm.
situation of like, I know this means a lot to me, and this whole scenario and the work we're going to be discussing and just this whole aspect of my life is very sacred to me.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's kind of like, and I don't know, I can't control how this call goes. I don't know what this means. I mean, it's self-sabotage, but it's maybe comes from this idea of like of just being completely terrified by new things. And again, it's happening like I think about it in terms of other aspects of life as well. Like it's so common to tell yourself, okay, I'm going to open myself up to a new experience, like, and then I'm going to try and get deeper in contact with myself. And then the second it starts to kind of happen, the reality of it is too terrifying, you know?
Yeah. And it's that idea of fantasy that we've talked about where it's like
Yeah, of
when things
course.
remain a fantasy, it can go as wonderfully or as
Yeah.
horribly as we choose to believe that it will. But once it's real and it's not fantasy anymore and it's out in the world, it's like, I can't control this anymore. And it could be better than I imagined, but it could be a lot worse than I imagined. Like this woman could be reaching out to me to help me with my work and then be like, all of this is shit. What do you think you're even doing?
I really do be analyzing everything to death. And so part of it as well is they're like, I'll help you publish this book. And then I'll talk to you about publishing this book, or I'll talk to you about your work. And immediately I'm just like, oh, it's not good enough. It's just this like sudden feeling of like, well, if I'm asking this person to help me, and if this is going to start happening now, it better be really good. And so if I'm able to believe in it enough to show up to the table in the morning, if I'm able to believe in it enough, kind of entertain it and go along with it and forward it and create it, I fall a little short, I think, and maybe this is what all U-turns are about. I fall a little short of believing in it enough to go to the next step, to like allow someone else to believe in it. And I think I believed literally up until now that like I won't do the next bits until I no longer feel that way, until I believe in these things enough, until I'm so excited to be like, yeah, read my draft. You're going to be blown away. You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
I thought it was a feeling I should trust because I thought that was like the voice of discernment, you know, in my mind. Yeah, and I think, and it is a fear of like, it's a safety thing of like, you believe your self-criticism because you're like, this is going to prevent me from embarrassing myself by putting out something terrible. But like the realization that like this is so common. First of all, I am a beginner, so this isn't, it might be bad. That's neither here nor there. Like we all have to
Yeah.
start somewhere. And just because your thing isn't perfect doesn't mean that people might not see something in it and want to help you. But also, you're always going to feel that way because Julia Cameron told me that I'm always going to feel that way. She was
Yeah.
like, this is just part of it. You aren't like, this is it. Everything feels right. This is the moment. You can just gently coax yourself forward.
I mean, I had a mentor one time tell me that like cuz I keep saying like I just don't feel ready to audition for things right now. I just feel like I still have so much to learn. And she kind of said it point blank and was like the way that you get ready for auditions is by auditioning. Like you're not
Mm.
gonna get ready for it unless you do it. So it's so seductive to be like, oh, just not yet, not yet, not yet. Like I'm not good yet. But like think about the way that we started our channels even. Like
Mm.
I'm sure that both of us could look back at some of our previous work and be like, whoa, okay, that's definitely not the quality that I might have liked for it. It's not the quality that I expect of myself now, but how were we ever going to get to where we are now without putting our work into the world and sharing it and, long before we felt ready. So, yeah, it's just so easy with all of your work because it's so precious and it's like an extension of you. And it feels so much scarier to put something that feels vulnerable and honest out for criticism
Mm.
because it just means that much more to you than something that's like, I don't really care about this, criticize this over here, but that doesn't help the main bulk of your work get better and become, where I guess you would hope for it to be one day.
Absolutely. I also think there's this line in this chapter where
Mhm.
she writes something along the lines of the thing that holds people back the most from their desire to make art is that they want to make good art.
Yes. Oh my
And
gosh.
It reminded me of this like hilarious quote that I heard, which is that anything worth doing is worth doing badly. It's entirely an ego thing to want to do something unimpeachably well. The true, like, humble, beautiful, pure impulse that we are trying to follow, that we're trying to make part of our lives because it'll just make our lives so much richer, doesn't actually care that much about the quality of the thing. It cares about like the sincerity of the thing and the beauty of the thing and the like wonder and joy of the thing, but it doesn't care so much about like quality, which is unquantifiable anyway. You were saying something about, I wonder if this is relevant. You were saying something about like rereading your morning pages as well. I wanted to
Yes.
ask you about that because that was the other thing we had to do this week.
It was like, it was really exciting and kind of like, wow, oh my gosh, I don't even remember writing half of that stuff, especially because we have to do it first thing when your brain is not really working adequately yet. And I think that's part of the beauty of the pages is like, there is no time to overthink it, and so much raw realness comes out. And I thought it was really fascinating because last week, our conversation, like I said, it revealed for me this major scarcity that I live with and that I think has been driving a lot of my decisions. And going back through my morning pages, I realized that this is something that I have put on paper so many times. It has been like this all-consuming idea for me that I've been living with, I'm sure, far, far past like just when we started this course together, but it's definitely been present from the beginning of starting the course. And it's so fascinating to me that it was a conversation with you in week 8 that finally revealed like what a problem this is. And I was just going through highlighting all of the anxiety that I had surrounding this and just realizing like, wow, this is major. And I am so motivated now more than ever to really work through this and to find that compassion with myself, because I don't want to let that be where my work comes from. You know, I don't want to be a suffering artist. I want to be a thriving artist. And I think this idea that there's not enough time is something that has been driving my work, and sometimes that's paid off for me, but sometimes it's really held me back in a big way, and I just want to explore that more.
How do you think your feelings if there's not enough time? It sounds obvious, but there might be something here, like ties in with this idea of discipline. Like, do you feel like a lot of your discipline comes from this desire to control time?
Oh God, yeah. I was thinking about it, and with our conversation from last week, I feel like I was struggling to properly articulate what I wanted to say, especially like with mortality and time and all of that kind of stuff. But what I realized is that basically I have been operating from this belief that life is short, and there will never be enough time for me to live all the creative lives that I dream of living. So therefore, I have to choose, and choosing one means giving up everything else that I dream of. And that feels so impossible for me and so scary for me that I either end up choosing all of them at once and therefore diluting the focus that I have on any one of those things, or choosing none of them because I instead choose to spend my time floundering and trying to mentally muscle through it before I make a decision to ensure that I'm making the right decision. And so this idea of discipline comes in, that's like, okay, if I can just set everything up just so, and so I know exactly what I need to do and when I need to do it, then I can do it all and I won't burn out and I'll get everything done and I will just like have all of this work to show for myself. Whereas now, I'm trying to find that healthier element of discipline where, yeah, there is enthusiasm in it. And I do look forward to doing the things I say I want to do. And I can just like, I'm working with this mantra that's like, I have so much time to live all of my creative lives. There is more than enough time for me to live all of my passions. And it feels a lot better and a lot more liberating.
The night before my birthday, where we were talking about how creativity should be larger than the
Yeah.
idea of a person. Like our selfhood is fake. So when we say I'm one person and this is what my personality and this is what my life is going to be like, we're kind of lying because we can't trust ourselves each morning to wake up as the same person. And maybe in that sense, like discipline is like a way to stop ourselves, to constrict ourselves from waking up tomorrow as a different person with a different desire, with a different creativity, channeling something
Mm,
else. Because it's
mm,
like, here I am today, and I'm telling myself that tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to eat this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to care about this. And that means that I feel safe because I know there's a possibility that today I want to write a novel, but tomorrow I could wake up and want to do a painting. And that randomness scares me. So I'm
yeah.
constricting my life by making it about one thing. And then that makes me feel safer because then I'm like, then I know I'll control the trajectory and I'll have this career by this age and whatever. And in a weird way, that makes us feel safer when it comes to our fear of death, because it's like I can ensure myself that I'll have a life and that it'll have all the bits that's supposed to have and the success and the fulfillment. But in reality, like there's so much more of an expansive way of going about it. Maybe let yourself be all of the people. And that in
Yes.
itself extends time.
This has gotten me curious now. How do you think your relationship with the idea of discipline as it relates to your creativity or even your life overall, how do you think it's going to be from here on out?
I do not know. This has really thrown a spanner in the works for me. For me, with the U-turns and everything that's come up there, I feel like I have really had a breakthrough this week, finding a source of a block that I didn't know I had, or just finding a
Mm,
way, like even just a symptom of a block, actually, not a source, a symptom of a block that I hadn't even seen before.
yeah.
And so I think this week, what it's going to be about for me is like leaning into and identifying those U-turns that I'm making right now, these places where my life is expanding and I, in response to expansion, am constricting, and coaxing myself over those humps. And so coaxing this week in a really gentle, loving way, curious way is what's going to be replacing discipline. And in that sense, like if discipline was a way for me to bulldoze through these things without doing the excavation and like
Mhm.
a deeper self-knowledge, like
Mm.
this week I'm going to let go of discipline so that I can see these things and just focus on just coaxing myself over these humps that I seem to be stuck at. But what about you? What do you think your relationship to discipline could be this week going forward, just to shake it up?
Just first of all, based on what you're saying, I love that and I take inspiration from it because it makes me think of like instead of standing behind the horse cracking the whip, we're in front of
Mm,
the horse being like maybe with a carrot being like or a sugar cube like
yes.
come on. That feels so much nicer and it just creates this whole other separate image of like the relationship that you even have with this horse not being this like cold, cruel, authoritarian with it. It's like it's a friend, it's something that you love, it's something that you cherish. And so I really want to take inspiration from that. I mean, something that I've already been putting into practice this week is just getting comfortable with the idea of listening to myself. And as much as like personal development and creative development and all of that stuff is a huge part of my life, it's changed my life for the better. And I'm always going to be grateful to it. And I'm always likely going to come back to it when I need to. I think that, like anything, you can have too much of a good thing. And so being comfortable with playing with the idea that it's like, you know what, some weeks you might not feel as productive and you might need to just listen to your body and be like, I am going to sit on a swing outside in the beautiful sunshine and read Anne of Green Gables for 3 hours and maybe skirt some of your other responsibilities, because likely in a couple days time you are going to feel jazzed, you're going to feel excited about doing those responsibilities, and you're going to make them happen no matter what. So like, trust yourself that it's okay to read a fiction book. You don't constantly have to be like bettering yourself and up leveling and like all of these things.
I feel like I might actually be your therapist. I am so proud of you right now. I'm going to go one step further as well. I want to
Okay.
delete the second half of that sentence. I want to throw out the bit where you're like, chances are in 3 days you'll want to be productive again. Get rid of that for a moment. You are literally a human being sitting on a swing reading Anne of Green Gables, not working.
Yeah.
Literally why you're here. Like, so part of it. That is joy. That is precious. I'm going to send you
Yeah.
some Mary Oliver poems.
Oh, your words from last week have been echoing through my mind the entire time of like, Veronica, you're fine. You're not going to be that person who's just like,
Yes.
and then she never did anything ever again. Like, it's okay to enjoy life and the fruits of your labor. And that is, yeah, exactly. That's the point.
We are artists because we have so much in ourselves we want to express. Like
Yeah.
self-expression, like putting out all of this emotion, all of this life is so important to us. And we have to be so careful that we don't make that expression such an insanely like single-minded focus of our lives that we no longer have a self to express at all.
Yeah,
Like we need to
exactly.
be people. You are a person.
Yeah, and it's like also this whole experience has just, you for sure are my actual therapist, and
Not licensed.
you should most definitely be charging me so much by this hour. Aside from that, like jokes aside, it really does show the importance and the value of community and of bringing these fears to light and to the surface, and then like sharing them with a trusted soul and getting a second opinion on it. And it's like, I think I definitely have a tendency to isolate and try and muscle through everything myself. And like, even to talk about discipline is just like the discipline of being like, we don't have time to deal with these emotions. So like, we've just got to get it going. And it's really, you know, there's such a beauty to sharing vulnerably with people who get it and people who can like help you coax that horse forward. And it's just like, hey, you don't always need to be cracking the whip at her, you know, like she's a creature. You've helped me get there in a big way, continuing to help me get there in a big way.
Oh, you too, absolutely.
So next week, week 10, it will be big. It will be big stuff, good stuff. I'm excited.
Mhm. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. As always, we'll see you next
Yes.
week on Veronica's channel.
Yay! See you next week.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Art Therapy. The course we are following is based on the book The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. If you would like to continue to follow us on this journey, you can find us every week for 12 weeks straight, alternating between Veronica's channel, Veronica Vicora, and my channel, The Prime of Life. You can also click here to gain access to the full playlists of episodes in order. Links to our channels, as well as our various other outlets, and to the Artist's Way book in both audio and PDF form, can be found in the description. Until next time, sending love.